What's up, Rockstars? Today I'm going to be talking about my love-hate relationship with narrative games. So by narrative games, I don't mean anything that has a theme or even a small story. What I mean is like very much narrative-led games. These are board games that have you making choices or give you lots of story, maybe lots of dialogue, maybe a grand scale like story thing or something like that. Not something that's like, I play it on the table and I see who gets the most victory points or something like that. So if it's telling an actual story, if you're going from start to finish and there is a finish, and you're doing a lot of story bits, that's what I consider a story game. I'm sure there's some in there that might be like kind of in there, but also kind of not, and everything in between. There's tons of board games out there, but I think you understand what I mean. Stuff like Oathsworn, stuff like Tenaris, right? Stuff like every legacy game you've played pretty much. A lot of these ones that have like apps that allow you to, choose different things. So a lot of the like Lucky Duck games, all that sort of stuff, I'm including in this. And I love them and I hate them all at the same time for various reasons. I want to discuss with you, mainly to kind of sync with you guys. What do you think about this? Do you have the same feelings as I do? Does maybe something not bother you, or maybe you love something that I don't, or vice versa? I would love to hear your thoughts on this. See if I'm the only one, because it seems for the most part we're getting more and more of these, at least in the crowdfunding space. But with all these legacy games coming out to retail lately and stuff like that, I think it's becoming more the norm than it used to be anyway. It's definitely growing as a part of the industry, I think. So let's see. What do I love? I mean, obviously the actual like narrative part of the game. It adds context, adds purpose, like weight to your ideas and your decisions and stuff like that. There are cool ideas in them. Going through Aeon Trespass Odyssey, about every single card or place I go to has cool, interesting things that are new and different and nice to explore. They often get me lost in the world of the game. Even going to places like Chronicles of Drunagor and stuff like that, where when I'm in the game and I'm seeing it kind of physically represented there, I at times forget I'm like, actually, it's kind of like what you see when you do a movie, right? The suspicion and disbelief and that kind of separation of yourself, where you're watching somebody else go through something and you're almost like a person. I get that a lot with narrative games. I don't get that playing something like Blood Rage. But a really chunky narrative game with lots of story and theme and all that, I get lost in the world and suddenly I'm there instead of here in my game room playing. And I really appreciate that. I think it's a lot of fun to do that. Depending on its structure, we'll talk about that. And then, of course, just decisions. I mean, it could be, mechanically speaking, I want to take over this, or I want to do this. And you could do that without the theme, without the story and all that. But when, instead of this is now something with purpose, with context, with history. It's now my arch nemesis that has foiled me time and time again, but finally I'm going to get him, and then I land the critical. It means way more than just a skirmish game where I just happen to be doing a critical hit on my opponent, who is nobody from Adam, as far as I can tell. And I really appreciate that, especially with decision-making in particular. I think the opportunity of choice is something that you don't get in a lot of things. Every board game has decisions to make, right? Do I do this or do I do that? Do I play this card or that card? To get victory points, stuff like that. But to actually have like choices scope the rest of the game and have those impact what happens and what you do, and they'll remember that kind of portion of it. Really, really fun and really engaging. It really makes you engaged with the story, with the game, in a much more real way. Instead of something like abstract points, you're actually now, saving people or hurting people or robbing people or, whatever it might be. It's all different in each game. And I just love the fact that we can make these choices. It makes you think. It actually tells you something. I guess that's another point as well, is stories can actually tell a story. And I know that sounds stupid when I say it like that, but I really mean it. If you're trying to actually convey a message or say something impactful, I feel you can do that much more, obviously, with a narrative board game than some other board game. We talk a lot about, how kosher it is to play some of these Euro games where, you're pirates or, just whatever it is, right? And there's some kind of bad history in there somewhere, which is a very real thing for a lot of people, of course, especially in people in other countries, I feel, that have a lot more heritage and history and culture than perhaps where I'm at. But I mean, wouldn't it be better if you could do that, but also the narrative is not preaching on it, but saying something about it, something wholesome or meaningful, just like movies do and music does and any other kind of creative format, I feel. And it's great to see board games do that. It's a lot harder, I'm sure it's not impossible, to do that strictly through mechanics. If this war of mine was nothing but mechanics and without any kind of theme or narrative situation to it, would it be as impactful? I would argue not. Now, obviously, it can enhance key moments. I kind of gave this example with the critical on your arch nemesis, but, when it comes to big culminative moments, I get this when I play Euro games. I'll go over to a friend's house to play those from time to time. And, it's really cool to get that land exactly what you needed. Or, oh man, I got right where I wanted to go. Or I invested more here and that was good for this or whatever. And you do that and it feels great. And you get those high moments, those high points. But those are enhanced 20-fold when there's context, when there's narrative involved in that. I love it. I think that's great. We're going to get to how I don't like all of this in a while, in just a little bit, but it's really impactful to be able to do that. Just the theme itself. I talk about how in Massive Darkness, I liked the fact that I could headbutt a goblin war boss to death. That's cool to me. I love doing that. I'm glad that there's context there, a narrative, especially if it was a pesky mob that got a good card draw on their equipment, so they're like buffed and it's really difficult and you finally get them and you're so excited, and all of that comes from story more than anything else. There is certainly mechanics, game mechanics, theme that can do that without a narrative, but the narrative lends itself greatly to that. You can love and hate these characters that these models represent, and you can go to town and do whatever it is you need to do. And I love that. So that being said, it's not all positive. For instance, a lot of what this involves in a board game, so this would not be as much the app-driven ones, though still slightly on that too, bookkeeping. It's just tracking stuff. It's great to make decisions, to, have choices that change things, but writing a little checkbox and referencing a matrix of checkboxes, or checking if you have a certain item, or grabbing a certain card and slotting it in, or taking certain cards out, or crossing out things, or writing notes and all that. The bookkeeping is a huge bummer and something not for everybody. It's something obviously video games have an inherent kind of a benefit on board games with the physical components. There's just nothing you can do but physically move these components. It's part of the process. And if you're wanting to track a whole lot of things, that means bookkeeping. You'll feel a little bit like an accountant as you track different things. This definitely came to my awareness in Aeon Trespass Odyssey while I was loving the story and the narrative. Even with the app, I was still even fiddling with the app to mark it there. You got to mark it somewhere. It doesn't just know unless it's driven by the app. So I've just documented in the app. So yeah, bookkeeping sucks. Just always. It's never fun. It's not a fun experience to do. Additionally, it's kind of hard to come back to. I've now packed up Aeon Trespass Odyssey. I'm doing Tenaris now. And, one of the things is I'll have to get back into Aeon Trespass Odyssey. And it's not exactly the easiest thing to do, because it's a narrative game. Same with Oathsworn, or, in any other game that has this big narrative where you have all this tracking and bookkeeping and stuff like that. And these are my skills and I'm level this and I'm doing that. And we're here and we're trying to go there. And I have to remember where we're trying to go. There's not a lot of summarization. A lot of times when I play video games, because I play video games a lot as well, they'll have a kind of a book, like you can go into the menu and check, okay, here's the story so far. And it's just like the bullet points. Here's what it is so far. I've yet to come across a board game that does that for me in an efficient way. And I think that'd be really slick if we started doing that. Because sometimes it could be a few months, for whatever reason. And I'm just now getting back into it. And okay, where am I at? What am I trying to do? If you've ever played an older video game, like maybe Final Fantasy 3 or something like that, even older than that, you'll remember that there was no quest log or anything like that. So if you left that game in the overworld and then you left somewhere and you came back months later and you forgot where you needed to go, it's almost impossible to find out. You're in the open world. You can go to any town. You can talk to people. You might be able to eventually stumble across it. But unless I'm going to this town, it's through this cave, and then to the northwest, you're just not going to know. And a lot of times I feel board games are kind of like that, and that can be a little rough. Now, additionally, when you have a narrative, typically the scope of that narrative is quite large. Part of what makes things pretty cool usually, but it just means a lot more variety, a lot more actual characters. Nothing's just generic representations of stuff. And so when you have specific characters, when you have specific heroes, when you have specific equipment and abilities and all that stuff, that scope just increases. Now, scope is not inherently bad, except when you have to represent all of that scope, it ends up being expensive, right? These narrative games are not typically cheap. Even just printing out The narrative itself, the text itself, can be this huge monolithic book of a thing, or worse, or you're doing foreteller and you're doing voice acting, or you got to get all the different cards. I quickly learned a couple years into doing this channel that board games aren't all created at the same cost. There are some that you can make much cheaper than others, and incredibly amount cheaper. You get something that's more of a Euro game. I designed, like, this is the map. These are the tribes or whatever it is that you have, the factions, it doesn't matter, the colors, maybe it's abstract. And this is what you do, and you do that. And then that is the scope. That is everything. And then the complexity comes from the nuance and replayability and stuff like that. But for a narrative game, it's much, much more expensive. You're now suddenly having thousands of pieces of art. You're having all these different cards and all this different text and the different ways to go about it and track it and do this and do that and level up mechanics and expansions and new areas and all of this kind of stuff just increases the cost. These are expensive, big games. They're expensive when it comes to real estate on your shelves. They're expensive when it comes to your pocketbook. They're expensive to ship, to buy, to store, every part of them. That scope increase just costs money when it comes to physical products, when it comes to board games. And it kind of sucks. It's really nice when suddenly you get a game and it was $50 and you realize that you spent like $650 on another one, and you're thinking like, how many times better is that game than the one I just did? Because I know how many times it is, like, mathematically, but I don't know if the cost of that really equates to that much more of an experience. It gets kind of rough. We're looking at $1,000 games at some points if you want the full narrative breadth of different characters and interactions and abilities and stuff like that. It gets a lot. So, yeah, that kind of sucks. The only other thing I think I would really touch on before my big negative is the format isn't always great. Very often, especially for, I feel, years, until just recently, most of the things you do are the format as follows. Read story, play a battle. Read story, play a battle. Read story, that's all it is. All it is the story is just like the storyboarding to get you to the next battle over and over again. And there's no intermixing, there's no none of that. There's zero story happening in the board game. When you're playing it, you read it's like reading a book and then playing that. It's almost like in school, I know sometimes they did this for my children, where they'd be reading a book in class, and after they got to a certain part, they'd watch the movie. I know I got my kids to do that with like The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, stuff like that. It's like, well, if you read that part, we can watch that movie. And so it's kind of like that. It's that same format, right? It's like the movie's the board game, and you have to just read a book on the side. Not quite the same thing. Additionally, another common format we get is the game that's just a series of skill checks. It's a story, it's a book with every now and then you make a decision and you roll a die. And you see if you did it or if you can do that decision or not, and then you read. And so it's just reading a book with a die. And you're just reading, oh, nope, didn't do that. Nope, okay, yep, got that one, and that's all it is. So there's a lot of kind of glorified, expensive skill checks where you get tokens and stuff like that, but they don't really add a lot of meat to the gameplay. The gameplay is really just reading a book and rolling a die over and over again. Repeat about 500 times until the story ends. So those kind of formats, not as enjoyable. If it's there layered onto other gameplay, often it is, but it's almost always there. Almost always. Not always, but almost. That's pretty much the format everybody does. Nobody else has figured out a way to do it any different, it seems. So, yeah, there's that as well. I guess the last bit, this is like the big one too. They take for freaking ever. They take forever. It just, every single game is 600 plus hours of like 5 people's time or something like that. It's not going to happen. So while I love these narratives, I rarely finish them all. Not to completion, not to the very end. So I have all these experiences that are just half done. I wonder the percentage of how many people played the last half of a narrative game versus the first half. I guarantee it's probably less than 50%. I wouldn't be surprised. You see this a lot in video games, like Steam, which is a kind of an online platform that sells and launches and kind of DRMs video games. They'll track a lot of what you do, and a lot of it is through achievements. And you can see like beat level 1, beat level 2, beat level 3. And you'll see the percentage of people lowers over time as people drop out and don't finish it. Until sometimes you get like the beat the last level and you see only 16% of people did it. 16% of people who bought and played that game are the only ones that saw the ending. Everybody else didn't. I think we see that a lot in these board games, especially these big narrative board games. I love them. I love the scope. I love the size of it all. Love the genre. Love the experience. Love everything that narrative adds, except the time. The time is really rough, and it kind of prevents you from fully experiencing it in a way. And I don't know how to feel about that. Not very good, though. Not very good. Guys, let me know your thoughts on this. Is this something you struggle with? Do you have a love-hate relationship with any other genres? Perhaps not just this one. I know a lot of times it's a point salad thing, or, they like these games victory points, but they don't like, scoring at the very end after the game. And I know there's all sorts of things. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. See where we align. Let me know what you think of my list here. This is something I feel very strongly. I feel a lot of you do too as well. But let me know. Anyway, guys, have a wonderful rest of your day. Take care. Bye, guys.